Those of you who are part of the group participating in this webinar, I'd ask you to turn off your audio so that we don't have interruptions to the panel. But after the speakers have spoken, we look forward to having your participation in questions and comments, and you can put those in the chat at any time, and I will call on you later as we proceed in the panel. Welcome to We Are One Humanity's second webinar. My name is Margaret Eastman Smith, and I'm a board member of We Are One Humanity. I'm a writer and former professor of international relations. I'm a longtime friend of Rajmohan Gandhi, the instigator of We Are One Humanity, and I will be your MC for this event. We Are One Humanity's charitable status does not allow it to endorse a candidate, but the website provides an opportunity for voices from around the globe to speak out for the values of trust, equality, friendship, fairness, mutual respect, human rights, and democracy that we hold to be sacred. All are welcome to state their personal views on these matters. We hold webinars on the first Wednesday of every month, so it was a matter of coincidence rather than intention that our present gathering fell on the day after the American election. When we planned this event, we recognized we might not know the outcome. But in fact, we've wakened up this morning to a new reality. And even if we suspected the chances of a Trump victory were high, we are still digesting that. It feels good to be coming together with this particular group at this notable time to take stock. I believe Tom Nichols of The Atlantic spoke for most of us when he wrote this morning, Trump's victory is a grim day for the United States and for democracies around the world. But the truth is, a large number of Americans feel such distress at their situation that the risk of undermining democratic values was not enough to stop them from voting for Donald Trump. We've invited 3 Americans to launch our discussion today. I will give each of them 5 to 10 minutes to offer a first round of reflections on what stays with them with regard to the process we have just been through, what this means for the world, and what lies ahead. After that, I will open the floor for discussion. As I said, if you have a question or comment, you can write it in the chat. And when I call on you, the spotlight will go to you and you can speak on your own behalf to ask the question or make the comment. So without further ado, I will proceed to the panel. The first person I'm going to invite to speak is David Anderson Hooker, who started his career as a lawyer and is a former Assistant Attorney General for the state of Georgia. He has served as a community psychologist and has more than 35 years' experience as a mediator, trainer, and community builder. He has had a number of permanent and temporary academic appointments, last year at Martin Luther King's alma mater, Boston University School of Theology. And after that, we will have 2 more speakers, but I think I will introduce them before they speak, so it will stay in your mind who they are. We can put the spotlight on them. However, we have Mridu Sekar, not sure if Mridu's here. We have Dick Ruffin, and we have Rajmohan Gandhi, who will speak at the end. Thanks so much, David. Over to you.
Thank you. Good morning to all. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I don't know what time zone you're in, but it is definitely a different day, a new day. I'll start off by at least framing where my reflections come from. I am disappointed, but not in any way surprised by the outcome of the presidential election. But what I think I take away from the presidential election, I also take away from the nuances that can be seen in many of the other elections, the smaller elections that took place around the country as well. I'm thinking of the number of criminal justice reform-minded prosecutors that lost their races or are still in very challenging runoffs. So the ideas that we thought might be getting some traction around the country of restorative justice and creating spaces for full inclusion, even among those who had previously been incarcerated. Those kinds of things there were some movement towards that, but that seems to be lost. That energy for inclusion, reconciliation, honoring, and dignifying, creating spaces for dignified existence seems to have been lost. And it wasn't just, it's clearly lost in the electorate. And I think that it reflects not just a national mood, but an international mood when the overstory is changing. That's language that Malcolm Gladwell is using in his most recent text, The Revenge of the Tipping Point. He talks about the overstory, and I like this idea of the larger meta narratives that are shaping our society. What's happening is that there are demographic shifts, there are class shifts, there are different narratives about what it means to belong, narratives of belonging that are being challenged in any number of places. Sticking with the US, We the People was written by a small, fairly select group of the people. And over the last 150 years, there has been contestation about whose voice gets to be included in the we. And whenever those shifts are happening, oftentimes it's violence, it's force, it's power that's used to try and establish an order that continues to privilege the original we in ways that that feel violent, that feel exclusive. And so we are witnessing a shift in the identity in the United States. And part of the response to that shift is to invoke a strong man, invoke someone who's willing to enforce a particular ideology. And we're not alone in that. You can see in a number of nations around the planet where there's this commitment, this push for kind of a strong, and I say conservative, not politically conservative, but conserving a particular ideological narrative, ideological thread. And you can see that happening in any number of places around the planet, in Nigeria, in the Congo, in India, in Israel, in any number of places. There's this contestation about who gets to be we. And I always imagined that in the United States, that would be a more difficult contestation to pass off, or to have that narrow kind of conservative thinking about it, because of the demographics, because of the multifaceted ideologies. And we don't have a particular ethnic ideology, a particular religious ideology, a particular demographic of any sort that controls. And right now it feels like there is still a core that is holding to an identity about what it should mean to be an American, and how everybody who deviates from that in any particular dimension, if you deviate too far, then you're deviant. And we're going to be able to use justice systems and legal systems and economic systems to either cause you to comport or to exclude you. So I'm not surprised with what's happened. I am disappointed, and I wonder whether because we're in the middle of an experiment. We always say we're in the middle of a democratic experiment, and we get to test it over the next 2 years we get to test how the idea of the United States, which is currently failing to be united, but this failing to be United States, we get to test that idea and see whether it's worth holding, or if we're going to enter the paradigm shift that so many other who have attempted democracy, so many other nations that have attempted democracy have attempted. So we're either in the midst of paradigm drift, paradigm shift, or paradigm transformation. Stay tuned.
Thank you, David. You sum that up so well, and I am now.
I have one more thing. I
One
just
thing.
realized it.
Okay.
One more thing. There was, at least in some quarters, there was the hope that a love ethic, that a respect ethic, that a ethic of humanity, inclusion, dignity, full flourishing for all would actually hold. And so whatever the policies were, as long as they were being articulated or being animated by a sense of respect, of love, of human dignity, of full flourishing and capabilities, that the policies themselves would be sufficiently attractive. And I'm not sure, when I look at the move away from criminal justice reform and inclusion and rights and responsibilities, I'm not sure that either a love ethic or an ethic of full flourishing hold anymore. And so I think that's going to be our great test. And we are one humanity is responsible for making sure that it does.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to call on Dick Ruffin. He and his wife live in Charlottesville, Virginia. He is a graduate of Yale and Oxford, and after brief service in the U.S. Navy, he worked with Initiative of Change, an international not-for-profit engaged in peace building. He was its executive director in the U.S. for 23 years and executive vice president of its international association for 8 years. Charlottesville, of course, came under the spotlight in 2017 as part of the story that we've observed over the past decade. So over to you, Dick. You're muted, Dick.
For me to be muted. Okay, here we go. Thanks very much for the intro. And thank you, David, for what you had to say. I invite us all to look at the map. Look at the map of the United States. This massive red and pockets of blue. We know that things have gone on because there have been grievances. We know there have been hurts. But I suggest for our reflection that we do not really know each other. That the issue before us, the glaring reality before us now, is that half the country does not know the other half. And what do I mean? People are not defined by their opinions. They're not defined by their religious beliefs. Every person has a story. They have hurts, they have hopes, they have feelings of many kinds. And as David Brooks points out in his latest book, it takes work to know the other person. You have to get inside their lives. You have to ask, you have to listen a long time. So my concern is that we have not got an ethic, even on my side of the spectrum, which is to the left, of really reaching out and trying to understand the other. Of course, that is true on the other side. I know very few on the right who are reaching out to understand the concerns of those of us on the left. What I'm reminded of a conversation I had many years ago, several conversations with James Billington. He was our librarian of Congress for, gosh, 20 years, I think, almost. And I used to see him on a regular basis, mostly to talk about things Russian. But almost always, towards the end of our conversation, he would invite a reflection on the culture wars. What are these culture wars? What is going on in our country, really? Why are these divisions? And at that time, we were talking about offshoring, the hollowing out of manufacturing from the center of the country. We were talking about immigration, and a lot was about the erosion of what many felt were traditional values. All those put together, created a kind of anxiety. Clinton tried to address it to some degree through his compromises on social welfare. It was an attempt to reach out. It didn't last long because we were euphoric about the technological revolution that followed. Then 9/11 came, and soon we were into the unending wars. What I suggest is that we have not addressed the concerns that Billington was talking about 30 years ago. That we still have this deep divide and an inability and even a lack of desire to really try to understand the other. Randy and I lived for a long time in a very red part of the state, a rural area where and all the folk in our church were Republicans, just about, not all, but most. And they were wonderful people. It was enough to be nice to them, but that didn't really get to the bottom of things. And I think even I would fault myself in not taking enough time to understand where they were coming from, what life experiences had led them to the beliefs that they had. So I just mentioned that as a backdrop because it's gotten much worse during the period of inflation and COVID, the unending wars that we are going through in Ukraine, the Middle East. There are a lot of causes of anxiety. And I think one of the challenges for us today is to ask, what do we do about this? And I think the first challenge for me is to find ways to reach out to those that have very different views from myself and understand better where they come from, how they got to where they are, and to listen deeply to them. In that sense, I'd like to recommend David's book, How to Know Another Person, because it's darn hard to do that really. Choices before us, I think we can talk about that. I hope there'll be questions about this. But obvious a choice I'm suggesting is that we have a choice to turn in, or we can reach out to these others. We can keep listening to our media feeds, our social media feeds and all that, or we can stop and listen more deeply within ourselves and to our neighbors. We are, as a nation, I think, are not dyspeptic. We're not pessimistic. We are a nation that traditionally has been optimistic, forward-looking, and I think we need to restore that. And how do we do that is a question before all of us. It's not enough to just hope we'll revert to the mean, and that mean is to be more positive, forward-looking in our frame of mind, but we need to take concrete steps to get that way. So I would leave it there, I think. I hope there will be some discussion about how do we bridge this gulf, how do we make that map a little more speckled and not solid red, and then with pockets of blue. And that, I think, is up to each of us to take steps in that direction.
Thank you, Dick. Raj Mohan, you have some words for us. Please unmute yourself, Raj Mohan. That looks good.
So am I unmuted?
Yes, you are. We can
Okay.
hear you.
Thank you, thank you. Well, I want to start by thanking David for his very profound remarks, very clear remarks. I really appreciate those. And I thank Dick equally for his profound and very clear remarks. And as for Margaret, I am amazed at her ability to bounce back. I know that she herself personally is so grateful for Kamala Harris and her fight. And so Margaret's ability to be so calm and so objective is very, very impressive to me. So let me just share some very simple points. First, just some reactions on my understanding of the actual voting results here. This may not be relevant, but just for whatever they're worth, these are some of my views. I think the bullet that could have killed him but did not was, I think, quite a significant factor, quietly influencing many voters across America. That many voted for his positions on immigration and wars around the world, his positions on immigration, his position on wars around the world. So people voted for his positions rather than for his personal conduct. They were not evaluating his personal conduct. They perhaps held their nose over his personal conduct, many of them. They were voting for his positions on immigration, wars, and some other matters. In my understanding, decisive numbers, not necessarily large numbers, but decisive small numbers of African Americans, Latinos, and Asian Americans, who are an increasingly significant percentage of the American population. They voted for the winner. And Trump's own very serious effort to get these votes paid off. I think he and his team put in for a long time, tremendous effort to get a slightly thicker slice of the African American vote, thicker slice of the Latino vote, and thicker slice of the Asian American vote. That also helped. But on a larger issue, the only thought I have is this: that freedom, justice, equality, decency, freedom, justice, equality, decency are not the inevitable state of nations. They're not the inevitable order of things. They are not any country's birthright. And this notion that the United States or any other country, that the normal is for freedom, justice, decency, mutual respect, equality to flourish, that is an over-optimistic notion. Now, the optimistic thrust of the American mind is a wonderful thing. But I think the notion that somehow America ought to be offering freedom, justice, decency, equality all the time to all its people is, I think, a utopian notion. These are not any country's birthright. We have to work for these. We have to fight for these. We have to listen for these. We have to pray for these. The notion that we are one humanity is not always accepted. It's a good notion, but we have to discover it. So I think that's really about all I want to say at this stage. Thank you, Margaret.
Thank you, Raj Mohan. Well, friends, we are relying on you to contribute to this conversation. So far, I've only got one message in the chat, so please consider putting something into the chat so we'll know you'd like to say something. But why don't I call on Ramsey in Brussels to lead us in this conversation? Are you there?
I am, but you are not able to see me.
There we are. So Edward is supposed to make you appear on the panel. I'm sure he's working on this.
I need people
There we
to
are.
their videos, otherwise I can't spotlight
Oh,
them.
so you
Which
have to
can now.
have your video on. Okay.
I
There we
had my
are.
video on, but it was disabled by the host. I know what I'm doing.
Okay.
Thank you. So on the point of speaking truth to power, there are mechanisms, there are structures. What I have in mind by way of example, but it's not exclusive, is participatory status in the Council of Europe, consultative status with the United Nations Economic and Social Council. So you can then take part in discussions of the Human Rights Council, which are, of course, driven by UN member states. And so these are ways of speaking truth to power. And my question is this: there are specific channels established with formal procedures for civil society, and I would suggest We Are One Humanity as an example of civil society, to speak truth to power. What accreditation might We Are One Humanity seek to get for itself, of course, so that it has access to these channels and engage more effectively with decision makers?
Thank you, Ramsey. Raj Mohan, do you want to respond to that?
I think I appreciate this thought. Ramsey has made this thought earlier too. I welcome that. I think it's worth considering We Are One Humanity trying to obtain that kind of status. But then We Are One Humanity needs some more active people at its heart. And so we may get the status, but who on behalf of We Are One Humanity will then speak to UN members, UN agencies?
I can respond to this very briefly. I didn't mean to cut across or interrupt. I'm not being rude, but trying to be supportive.
No, I appreciate that. Go ahead,
Ramsey. So the mechanism, Raj Mohan, in the case of the Human Rights Council, is simply submitting a formal written statement. There is no need for a person to be physically present in a meeting. There is also the option of doing a video recording and submitting a video statement, but it's not obligatory. You can simply submit it as what's called a formal written statement. I have gone into some detail in understanding how this machine works. It is a rather complicated machine, but it's not unwieldy. And the main trick to it is to be aware of the very narrow windows that are set for submitting formal written statements under specific agenda items. I'm not going to bore people here with going through intricate details. I'm more than happy to collaborate with anyone who's interested to pursue this further. And I'll be more than happy to serve We Are One Humanity if I'm called upon to do so.
Thank you very much, Ramsey. Greatly appreciate it. And somebody on behalf of We Are One Humanity will remain in contact with you. Thank you, Ramsey, so much.
You're most welcome.
Ramsey's comment in this interchange with Raj Mohan, of course, speaks to the question of the future of We Are One Humanity and how do we make use of this. This is an initiative that's still quite new, and it's still figuring out its role in the world and how to find the people who will be part of the infrastructure. So part of what we're interested in when we offer you the chance to speak is to actually speak to that question, and grateful for Ramsey's thought on this. We're going to go next to Randy Ruffin. You're muted, Randy. I told everyone to mute themselves, so now,
My mute was covered.
there we go. Oh. Now we can't see you, but there we are. Okay. No, we
Yep.
can't hear you. You are muted.
I unmuted
There you are.
once.
You're fine now,
There you are.
Randy. Go ahead.
All right. Just a simple question is how and where do we find hope today after the U.S. election results? I know I find hope in things like news I read, one bit of news I read yesterday of a busload of 50 some Amish going down regularly to the mountains of North Carolina and building little homes for people whose homes were destroyed in the flood. And I think that there is an aspect, there's a lot of good in this country, but I would be interested in the comments of others.
Any
So-
panel members?
So Randy, I wonder whether you're asking, are there indicators for hope outside of the electoral system, or are you imagining that we should be looking for hope inside of kind of electoral politics? I'm not sure if I'm following that part of your question.
Could be either or both.
Yeah.
Because obviously, in order to get policy changes, you've got to have people elected who will help do that.
Yes.
You can work
And-
for structural changes even if you're not elected, certainly.
So this is my kind of theoretical, practical approach to this transformation. Every system that we have, every structure that we have is affirming a particular narrative. And so if we want to change systems and structures, the systems and structures only exist because they make sense within a particular narrative frame. And often it's the case that many of us have gotten the benefits of certain systems and structures. And so we want to undo the part that's not beneficial without fully challenging the part that is beneficial. I dare say that capitalism is a necessary result of capitalism is that many people will be exploited and marginalized. It's just a natural part of the way that the systems are organized. And the only political options that we seem to have, that we cling to in the country, are either a neoconservative or a neoliberal support of that capitalist thing. And so we can start finding hope in those small efforts that are really designed to overcome the ills of capitalism and actually even to reimagine the ills of capitalism and the narratives that divide us, all those different narratives of race and class and gender that we've used and make meaning of in our day-to-day work. How do we go about crafting new narratives that, and actually how do we organize our lives in ways that actually affirm that we are one humanity, that we aren't making our meaning based on those divisions that cause exclusion and exploitation. So I think we got to look in both places, but big politics changes will happen in response to small, local, and regional narrative changes. And that's work that we can do.
May I add something?
Yeah.
To make us one humanity in the United States, we need policies that address the concerns, the grievances, hurts of that red part of the country. For years, decades even, educational policy, immigration policy, it favored technology and the elites. Biden tried to change it, but it was way too late. With the CHIPS Act, with the IRA, these things were serious attempts to address the concerns of those, you could say, in the red part of the country. Even tariffs can help do that because, for example, the manufacturing sector in America has been in recession for the last 2 years, despite Biden's very good legislation, because it takes time. So he started way too late. But for 30 years, we delayed really addressing the real economic, the housing, the jobs needs of the people who saw their jobs offshored. And we, last month, our imports were up. We're still getting things from overseas in great abundance. And that has to change. And I think many people in the country feel that Trump is more likely to bring those changes rapidly than Biden has been able to do, even though he did intend to make important changes with regard to those needs.
Can I keep wrestling with this, with Dick on this? Dick, I think you're right. But what I just heard you say was that those folks who lost the Confederate War but won the Confederate narrative, we need to pay attention to their grievances. And the folks who actually have really, really, really been oppressed by the concept, the constructs of this United States, the indigenous folks, the Black folks, the Latino folks who have been pushed off their lands or who have been, kind of
Right.
deeply impacted by settler colonialism, that those aren't concerns or grievances that we also have to consider. And I do think that Trump will consider the folks that you talked about, but not consider all those other folks.
I totally agree with you. I totally agree with that. But it's not enough of an answer to just focus on those rightly aggrieved identity groups that you have talked about. They are really important. We have to keep it. We have to hold two things out at once. And I think Biden was trying to do that in a way, but it takes a long time to reverse a long-term trend in manufacturing. I remember being with one of my good friends, George Sherman, who was counseling some factories in Missouri, when suddenly those factories were offshored and the people in his small town had nowhere to go. They had no job to get. And they've carried that for 30 years. So I don't know how it is today, but so many communities experienced that loss. And we were just too late to address that.
Let's go to Andrew Stallybrass.
Well, I was just thinking my last trip to the States was to visit my brother and sister-in-law who live in Massachusetts. And before we went, they asked us what we would like to do. And we said, we'd like to meet some Republicans. And they said, we don't know any. And I think that is a reflection on all of us. I said in the chat that for me, that the largest party in the Swiss Parliament is the furthest from my personal beliefs and opinions. They're way to the right. I'm more to the left. And how many people do I know who vote for that party? How can I reach out to them and understand what makes them tick? And it's a real challenge. I honestly don't know quite how to do it. I think I know perhaps 2 or 3 people who vote for that party. But I think there's a very interesting question for us all about identity and where we belong. My brother just sent me 2 or 3 days ago a paper about his reflections on identity and belonging, and the fact that all of us, if we're honest, are on a piece of land that belonged to somebody else before us. And we're all a very, very mixed race. He was sending me a poem by one of the the great 17th century British writers who said the British don't exist as a race. They're a mix of Picts and Celts and Anglo-Saxons, and we're layer on layer on layer, and yet so many of us cling to a single identity, and we want to defend what we imagine to be our identity, but it's an imaginary identity. It's not real.
We have a number of comments from people, and they don't necessarily require a response from the panel, but the panel is welcome to respond if you wish.
Margaret, you
yeah.
see the two hands that are up? I don't know if you can see electronically.
I cannot see electronic hands being up. Are
So
there some?
Jeffrey Lean and
Yeah,
Howard
Jeffrey Lean.
Grace.
Okay,
Jeffrey
so
Lean and
I
Howard
just
Grace.
want to say to people who are not on the panel that I cannot see your hand. So you have to say something in the chat for me to know that you want to say something. That said, okay, so I've got Howard. Thank you. Howard.
There's also Jeffrey Lean.
Yes, well, we can only have one at a time, but let's go with Howard.
Oh, here I am. The gist of the questions and conversation is reaching out to the other. And I think one of the really successful programs with initiatives of change is the trust building program. And that goes on in quite a number of countries now. And I think we need to really foster that spirit and support it. I'm personally involved with making the film on Joe Berry and Pat McGee from the Irish situation. And that is reaching out to the other and fostering that spirit. So I just want to push that in.
Thank you, Howard. Let's go to Jeff Lean.
My video is very hazy. I don't know why. I hope I'm not quite as hazily thinking as my picture.
We can make you out. We can make you out.
As long as you can hear me, that's great. No, I very much agree with Dick on the Biden was a consequential president, did try to do what he could. There was a long neglect of the people who turned to Trump. Actually, I'm not nearly as protectionist as you are, Dick. I think free trade's rather a good idea, but I do think that the Blair Clinton age neglected their people, and that is what we are now paying for after the Thatcher Reagan age. And I can digress on that a long time, but leave it be. I think two causes for hope. One, nearly 50% of America did not vote for Trump, despite high inflation, etc. So there's a huge reservoir of goodwill there. Secondly, that Trump, in his two victories, has shown that systemic change is possible, that big changes can be made in terms of change of mind, change of thinking, etc. It's not just systematic, it's not just incremental. Now, I happen to believe those changes are disastrous, but and actually Brexit's another case of Britain at the same point. But it does show the possibility for making big swings. However, the right were working at this for many, many years. The right put the philosophical work, the hard work in for decades, and the left has not done so. And the way Dick was saying, the left went along with it, really. Now, as for the future and hope, I mean, I think it just requires engaging. It's amazing how far one can be led if one just decides to engage. I quite often give the stories of two people who've been known to most of the people in this panel. A godfather of mine, a rum old duck called Kit Prescott, who went to Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, at the very heart of the crisis, to try to do something about it, and bit by bit met people after person, and brought about change. Another guy very close to my wife and I, Leslie Fox, did the same thing in Northern Ireland, Both were incremental in bringing about the solutions. You could not have found more unlikely people to do it if you look for them. One, as I say, quite a rum old duck, the other an accountant. Now, my own experience of that is that I have been in a fortunate position where I've been able for many years to speak truth to power through being a journalist. But I did decide to go to the most right-wing paper in Britain to write a column in the full knowledge that sooner or later I would be fired, which indeed I was. But that was an attempt to try to speak across the divide, despite to speak to other people. And it still has effects in that only on Friday, the now shadow Minister for Energy and Climate Change, who was the minister up to July, is coming to see me to seek my advice on what she should do. Though we have very different positions on climate change and energy. But I think because I've tried to operate with integrity and tried to reach out over the divide, she wants to do that, and it's her suggestion, not mine. So, I think it is a matter of engaging with integrity. And it's amazing what can happen if one does.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeff. If there are no comments from the panel, I'm going to go to Rob Corcoran.
Hi. Well, I came into this call about 10 minutes late, so I may have missed something, but I want to thank all the panelists for what has been shared. As I put in the chat, I agree with a comment in the New York Times that the population turned to Trump as a battering ram against the ruling establishment, against the establishment and the ruling elite. And I think Dick is correct in saying it. The extent to which we are divided as a country and do not listen to each other, I don't think we fully recognize the enormous impact of COVID-19, the opioid epidemic, the loss of jobs, and much of this was in parts of the country that were already underprivileged, and that's where a lot of the Trump supporters are. I think, Texas, where I live, I'm an immigrant now. I mean, I'm an American citizen, but I immigrated to this country more than 40 years ago. And Texas is a land of immigrants. Our population now is close to 60% Latino. It's true to say, if you look at American history, groups that have moved to this country very often then turn against later immigrants. I mean, this was the case in Chicago, places like Chicago, which had a lot of immigrants from Eastern Europe escaping what was going on there. But then when African Americans moved up from the South, they burned their houses, and Martin Luther King said it was the most racist place he'd ever been. So there is this pattern of immigrants turning against later immigrants. I don't think also the Democrats fully appreciated that Latinos are largely conservative in many ways, conservative on family values, conservative on self-help, self-responsibility. So I think all of these things played a role. On the positive side, the election took place peacefully. Now, we don't know what would have happened if it had been the other way around, but lessons were learned from 4 years ago, and very careful preparation was done and meticulous counting of the votes. And we should be grateful that the system works. And as others have said, at the local level, Americans, in most cases, work together actually very well. So we've got a disconnect between what happens at the national level and the local level. And the only other comment I would make is that we do have a problem with our electoral system. I mean, America was designed as a republic, not a democracy. And the way the electoral college is set up now creates a huge imbalance, in fact, where we have tiny parts of the country exerting enormous power. And I think that's a real problem. don't know what the answer to that is. But anyhow, I thank the panel for all you've shared. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Rob. Amelia Specht. Sounds like you've been working with Murdu Sekar, who hasn't made it to the panel this morning, but maybe you can say a little bit on her behalf about what you've been doing with her. Are you here, Amelia?
I think she may have left.
May have left. Okay. I think this group who've been working with Murdu have been working pretty hard, so they're pretty exhausted this morning. Ken Noble. Ken, are you here?
I am. I've got a message saying you cannot start your video, but I seem to be visible to me anyway.
Yes,
I didn't really expect to speak, but I happened to be leading a time of reflection with a few friends the other day, and because the election was on, I decided to look up various references to America. And I reread Abraham Lincoln's second inaugural address, which is very short, but must be very familiar to all of you who live in the States. But I found it really inspiring. I mean, he says in a very few words what I feel is a real program of, if you like, of what one humanity means. I won't read it all out, but I'm sure it's available on the internet to anyone who's wants to pursue it.
Thanks, Ken. Richard Weeks and then Björn Ole Austad.
Yes, hello, good morning. Greetings from across the border in Canada to all our friends in the United States. We've been following these events very closely and also nervous about how they will affect our future as well as yours. A question I have is, I remember somebody writing, maybe it was the title of a book about married couples. We are one, but which one? And I wonder whether it is fair to ask at this point, we are one humanity, but which one? Many seem opposed to the very concept and are yet part of our troubled humanity. How does WAOH, We Are One Humanity, address this beyond persuading others to see things our way?
Any panel members want to respond to Richard, or you want to table that one?
I'm happy either way.
Meanwhile, Mridu seems to have joined.
I'm sorry, did I miss the time?
Yeah, it was, you probably thought it was an hour later than it is, but Mirdu, where are you? Let's get you on here, Mirdu. Good to see you. Welcome.
I'm so sorry. I thought it was, I mixed up the Eastern versus Central time zone. I thought it was 10 Central.
Well, it was 9 Central.
Oh my gosh, okay.
So, but you're
anyway.
here, so that's wonderful. Thank you for coming.
Do you want me to say something?
Yes, please.
It's been a very difficult day yesterday and night and today, so I am not surprised that I am a little bit confused about the time. My husband and I have been in Dearborn, Michigan for 3 weeks, talking to Arab American voters and talking to some of the university students in the area, but mostly to Arab American voters in their homes. And what I have found is what I'm going to share with you. First of all, the campaign office was set up just 3 weeks ago in Dearborn to address their concerns, to reach out to Arab American voters who are very angry with what is going on in the Middle East, because obviously right now it's not just Gaza and the West Bank, but also Lebanon has been dragged into the whole situation. And these are people who are immigrants here from many decades ago with children and grandchildren. The people who have organized it are Biden administration, Arabs who are about 20 or 30 Arabs in the administration who are trying to address these issues. And looking at what happened yesterday, the conclusion I came to was that while going from door to door and talking to individual people, you are able to connect with the human being. So addressing this issue of we are one humanity, they are able to reach out to each other and to us as humanity. But changing their minds about how the humanity should go forward is a different kind of engagement. And yesterday's results told me that I don't have a clue how that happens. So there's one question of having the humanity to talk to you and for you to invite me into your home and give you tea and sweets and being the, gracious hosts and understanding that you have different opinions. I know you like Kamala, and I think she's a genocidal person, and what the Biden administration has done is genocidal, and all that. And then when I leave them and they say, you know what, I'm going to consider voting for Kamala just because of you. But then when they go to the polling station, they do differently. They just are not able to bring themselves. And they don't see Trump having said Muslim ban and all this other stuff. So there is that business of we are one humanity. I think it's a wonderful question. There's the issue of human relations face to face. Very rarely do people look at you in the face and point a gun. But how do you find common cause? So I feel this morning extremely distraught. The leadership of the organization was a Palestinian young man, 29 years old. His parents lived in the refugee camps in Lebanon in maybe, 70 years ago, whenever it was. But his grandfather moved them to the United States because this was a place of hope and humanity. And these same people believe that they have all the rights and privileges of this haven called United States. But their actions are really geared towards this place halfway across the world, which they are not able to sacrifice to make better. They don't know how to go about it. And the young people are getting their news from sources that have a completely different I don't know what, the sources, I have different news from the ones that these young people have. So how can you talk about something in common when we come from a different fact base? So I am extremely distraught this morning, and I'm sorry to bring this to this forum. I think Rajmohanji and Margaret, please take it from here.
Thanks, Marju.
Just one
Rajmohan, Dick, fine, okay.
comment. There's nothing to fault in Kamala's campaign. Tremendous effort. I've made hundreds of calls myself. I was part of a group in the Rust Belt that must have made 10,000 calls easily. Lots of effort. This is not to fault the campaign, but we do need to go back and look at ourselves as to whether over the last 10, 20 years, we have made genuine efforts to establish common ground with those that we disagree with, to reach out to them, to know their life experience. I don't want to repeat myself, but I think it's true that we haven't really made that effort enough, even as individuals. And it won't happen overnight. But if more of us undertake deliberately to do what Andrew tried to do when he came to America and meet some Republicans, okay, we have to reach out and make that a deliberate effort, because we will find there are some deep hurts that need to be addressed. And Yeah.
You know, I just wonder whether WOW needs to have an activist arm or some to address Dick's point. I think that there has to be some action. And I keep going back to Mahatma Gandhi's own life of sacrifice. This generation and our generation does not understand the meaning of sacrifice. So I don't know where to go from here. But I do believe that collectively WOW has the people who can make it happen. And this group that I belong to now, the Arab American group in Dearborn, filled with young people. You know, I have a 2-minute video, which, if you will allow me to share, is just beautiful. It was given by this young Jewish boy at an interfaith community meeting, which they tried to put together to bring this community together.
I don't know what to say about sharing the video with the group because we've actually gone past our 1 hour time limit. Maybe could you put it in the chat because people could probably get it from that, I believe, if I have a sufficient grip on the technology of that.
I'll do that. Thank you.
I'd like to exercise my role as chair just to underline what David said, because I feel very conscious that the group gathered here is very white. It doesn't represent so many minority groups as I would have liked it to. And I think that the whole question of the narrative that for so many decades or centuries in the US has actually been able to hold up these very high ideals, but then actually leave many, many people completely marginalized and unsupported, that the processes of denial in this country are very long-standing, and so when we're talking about reaching out to others, it can sound a little superficial, even though it's absolutely right. And that this may be a moment for a much deeper turning point in the United States in terms of how we can articulate a very different idea of what we really mean by the values that this country espoused at the outset, and how those have to be unpacked and developed in a different way. So I'm particularly grateful to David for highlighting that for us, but just feel that as I go forward, I don't want to be too quick to think that I know who I need to reach out to, because there's just such a huge array of different concerns in this country right now, not least what's happening in Gaza, and that all of us carry that in our hearts, carry the entirety of the African American experience in our heart, and the Native American experience in our heart, and that some way that we re-articulate the goals of the United States has to hold all those things together. I think that if there's no more comment that anybody wants to make, we should close this webinar now. We try to keep it to an hour. We are so grateful to all of you who've participated, both the panel and those who are not on the panel, and for primarily giving a sense that we are actually trying to hold this moment as one, as we try and figure out how to go forward.